Hola, hola, everybody. It's Dr. J. Flo. I wanted to let you know that today's episode is a summary of our favorite moments in Season 3. If you find any of these extracts interesting, we have added all the links to the episodes to the show notes so that you can easily find the episode that caught your attention. So go check it out. And one last thing. If you have a family member, a loved one, and or a friend that could benefit from this podcast, please share this episode with them. We think it is a nice way of learning more about our project without investing too much time. That's it for now. Stay tuned for some exciting new developments in the near future. And remember, unidos somos más. Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I bring you the last episode of this season. And to celebrate, I decided to share our favorite parts of our conversations with the guests we had on Season 3, because they're here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Our first episode of this season was a two-part episode with Dr. Lynette Mera, co-founder of the Unconscious Bias Project. Dr. Lynette Mera is originally from Colombia and lived in 5 different countries during her childhood and teenage years, an experience that helped her understand the value of diversity and the importance of inclusion. She obtained a bachelor's degree from Texas A&M University and a PhD from the University of California, San Francisco, or UCSF. Dr. Mera lived some harsh experiences as a female scientist, having to deal with toxic environments that are still prevalent in academia. After she recovered from this experience, she decided to co-found the Unconscious Bias Project, a nonprofit organization that uses scientifically backed tools and approaches to drive systems change. Dr. Mera and I shared very similar experiences as women of color in technical fields, but my favorite part of our conversation was the tools she shared that we can use in order to fight against bias. Listen to this.
We define bias as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. And when we talk about unconscious or implicit bias, it's bias that you have even though you're not agreeing with it, or even if you don't know it's there. So what does that mean? That means that, for example, my professor who was tapped by President Obama to be on his science council, this is the guy that's like, we want, equality for women, right? That was his line. Like, he literally has his face on top of that line everywhere. This is the same person that wouldn't invite women to go to conferences. So he, on the one hand, is like, I am 100% feminist. I support women in science. I have women in my lab who are scientists. Never even looked at his track record. There are almost no women that went through his lab that are now in professor positions. So that he has unconscious bias against women, right? So you say one thing, and if somebody asks you, like, are you a misogynist? You'd say, no, absolutely not, right? And so those are biases that we have. And, I picked him as an example because it's really easy, but you can be biased against your own in-group. So, for example, one of the things that I learned is that even women are more likely to write recommendation letters for women that cite, they're good teachers, they're really great people, as opposed to talking about their scientific skills, for example. So we can be biased against our own in-group. And where do these biases come from? They're really, the way we think about them is that they're coming from stereotypes that are in our world. So what does that mean? That means that could be people that you're talking to. That could be something you see on the TV. Like, quick, think of a scientist right now. Albert Einstein, right? That was the first one you thought. Yeah. Old white guy, right? Like, because that's where you see everywhere, right? In kids shows, who is the scientist? In movies, who's the scientist? In books, who's the scientist? In fiction books, who's the scientist? If someone is like, okay, who is the foremost person in your field? Like, who's the more impactful paper that you've read in your field recently? Who's going to be cited more? White guys, right? Because it's in our books, it's in our textbooks, it's on the internet, it's on Twitter, it's everywhere. So when we're dealing with this mountain of stereotypes and ideas about who belongs and who doesn't belong in a field, like, you actually have to work kind of hard to notice. So first step is noticing. Like, notice these associations, notice these stereotypes. Even if you think they're really obvious, notice them. Okay, this is a stereotype. Okay. And then what you want to do is counter that. So whether that's opening up a space for somebody that's different from you, whether it's getting to know, say, a disabled chemist in your field. So, for example, one of the techniques that we use in our workshops is stereotype replacement. So as soon as you see another image, for example, another TV show with a stereotype of an aggressive, loud black man, because that's everywhere, or in the news, right? Then immediately think of President Obama. So think of somebody that's counter-stereotypical to that stereotype, and that's enough to start reducing your bias. The scientists who study this call it the Obama effect. So all you need to do is like, okay, the next time I see another Albert Einstein, I'm going to think of Marie Curie. I'm going to think of, like whatever, like pick your favorite scientists, remember them, remember their characteristics, who they are. And whenever you see that stereotype, replace it, right? Like that's an easy thing you can do. Start opening your networks. Not everything has to be at like a policy national level, but if there's that opportunity, go for it. If there's a vote coming up about, women's rights, if there's a vote coming up about changing how, for example, your university or your work is doing its hiring practices, be vocal, be out there. And if nobody's talking about it, ask about it. One of the other things that we teach folks is to recruit bias buddies. And so we use the term bias buddies. What it means is active allyship. So find people that have different identities than you, that are on the same page with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have them be in the room with you and advocate with you when you're asking for like transparent pay, for example. So it's not just Jenny that's coming. Oh, it's, that Latina woman. That's just, whatever. She's always talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But maybe it's also Bob, right, that's bringing this up. Maybe it's also, I don't know, Rachna, right? Like maybe it's somebody else. And so, okay, these are all these different people. Maybe they have different levels in the organization than you. Maybe you're the only like manager in that position that's advocating for this, but maybe an employee is also advocating for this. Maybe a C-level person is also advocating for this. And it's like, okay, it's a bigger thing, right?
Our next episode was episode 26, where we talked with Maria Angelica Peña, also a native from Colombia, who migrated with her family to the U.S. when she was 12 years old. Maria Angelica is an old friend from the University of Florida, where we met, and more than 10 years later, we reconnected in Houston, where she puts to practice her engineering skills at a large corporation. Most recently, however, Maria Angelica embarked on a journey to create a community called Café con Plan, where she provides actionable advice to help people achieve their goals through 3 essential steps: ser, hacer, y mantener. Here is a very important piece of advice that Maria Angelica shared that can be applied to any stage of our lives.
This brings me to my second piece of advice, and that is you need to understand and have clarity around what it is that you need or what it is that you want and how might you get it. So in the context of your question, this can be translated to I want to get a taste of what working in a company is like before I graduate, right? So like, is that my goal? Is that something I'm interested? Just let me experience what it is like to work. Because if that's what you want, therefore you'll focus your efforts on an internship. Or is your need or desire to, I want to reduce my student debt as much as possible? Then you would focus on getting scholarships or even finding a job while you go to school. So it sort of depends what you're looking for or what it is that you need. Now, it doesn't mean you can't let's say, kill many birds with one stone, right? You could potentially get a paid internship, but there are some cases in which you can't quite bundle all the things that you're looking for into one. And this is where it matters to really understand what it is that you want so that you can prioritize accordingly. So this is when we need to make decisions based on what we value the most and what we're seeking. And there's no right or wrong answer. So you just need to be honest with yourself about what you want. And we're each kind of like in our own experience, in our unique journey. And then once you realize that, then going back to the first advice, again, surround yourself with people that are in search of that, or find those role models that can guide you through it. So if it's, again, corporate experience, then try to find people that have gone through internships or that are working at a company. If it's, you want to just look for ways to make your, let's say, degree more affordable, then can you find that part-time? Can you, find out what scholarships are available? So I think the number of opportunities that exist are endless. It's just you do need to focus on how are you going to spend your time, because you could honestly just spend hours looking at all the things possible and not get anywhere. So what is it that you're trying to get? That would be my advice here.
On the fourth episode of this season, on episode 27, we talked with Dr. Eliza Teipel, co-founder and chief development officer at Essentium Inc. Dr. Teipel talks about her experience growing up in Colorado, practicing Taekwondo at a high-performance level and attending school. She talks about how being devoted to both sports and school from an early age helped her build resilience and tenacity, and how these two traits have been key for her success as an entrepreneur. Dr. Teipel also shared with us the things she wished she knew before becoming an entrepreneur. Here's what she had to say.
I think with entrepreneurship, if I would have known when I first started that it was going to be this hard, I would have still done it, but I think I would have probably prepared a little differently. There's a really high cost to being an entrepreneur. I think there's a lot of glamour in it. My best friend jokes, she tells me often, she says, "Oh, you're so lucky you work for yourself. Like you started a business, a company, and you're a co-founder, and you're so lucky you get to put your own hours and stuff." And I'm like, you're right. I get to put my own hours, but they are long hours.
Yeah.
There is a high cost to my family, even to my health. I hate to say it, but sometimes even to my health. So there's a high price for that. Also, you do lose a lot of your freedom because you have freedom. It's really strange. It's like on the outside, it looks like you have a ton of freedom because you're starting something on your own, but you have a lot gets taken away because you have to be so devoted to it. And so I don't complain though. I love it. And they're just realities that comes with it. But I think the end result and the every day to day is so rewarding. So even though there's a high price and even though that you don't have as much freedom as you might think, there is just this complete devotion and this beauty that comes of it. And I do joke many times and say, it is like my first child.
Dr. Teipel also talked about the importance of having a funding strategy for your startup and understanding what it means to take someone else's money. Check it out.
I think one of the things that you have to, and I think you see it, if any of you have seen Shark Tank, the show Shark Tank,
yeah,
someone will go on the show and they'll have an idea and they'll say, I want some funding for my idea to make my idea come true. I need $300,000 or whatever. And then the shark will say, okay, for 30% of your company, I'll give you $300,000. And the other says, for 20% of your company, I'll give you $400,000 and let you have a say in it. Or the one will say, well, I want 90% of your company or I'm not doing anything. And so I say all those extremes to say, when I talk about an investor strategy, as a co-founder and as an entrepreneur, you need to be comfortable and really understand what does it mean when you take someone else's money? Do you give up control? How much? How much equity do you keep? How much is it worth? How much are you going to be worth in 5 years, 10 years? Where do you accept the funding and what are the terms? Don't just take money without knowing the terms, and not understanding them. I think that's something that any entrepreneur will tell you, and I'll tell you myself, is that you really have to understand it. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs don't know enough of. I know I certainly didn't, and I've learned a lot over the years.
Right.
And so I think that one of the best things you can do for yourself is to investigate and start finding out what terms are you comfortable with. What is your strategy? Are you going to bootstrap? Are you going to go find angel investors? Then venture capital? Do you want to stay a private company? Do you want to be a partnership? What is it that you want to do? And I think that's really important early on. And then you need to revisit it every so often. It's not necessarily that you're going to have an answer every single, day, or it's going to be, you're not going to have an answer for 10 years, but you can at least be planning for that.
On the following episodes, we really focused on understanding how funding works for entrepreneurs and how inventors of color and those who belong to minority groups don't get the same opportunities as white male inventors. We started this conversation with Eli Velasquez on episode 28. Eli is the co-founder of the Investors of Color Network, an ecosystem of Black and Latinx accredited investors working to close the racial funding gap. In this conversation, Eli helped us understand how the investment side of the entrepreneurial ecosystem works and how that system has left out people of color, which leads to less funding opportunities for inventors of color. Here is what he had to say.
In large part, when we start looking at the investor side, it is a predominantly white male dominated industry, right? Whether it's angel investors, venture industry, private equity, banking, and that goes back decades, and you can study the long history of, how those systems were implemented way back in the day. And so it left literally legally, in many cases, people of color out of the opportunities to get into the financial ecosystems, right? And so what we are facing now is that trying to change that systemic challenge of how do we get more investors of color into the game. And so for many years, and this has been one of the barriers, has been you have to have a certain net worth, you have to have a certain income requirement, you have to have certain assets you have to have certain degrees, right? You have to have certain certifications. So all these different barriers to entry have kept Latinos out of the equation. You saw that transcend down into the next phase where those investors that are predominantly white are going to invest in people that look like them and think like them. So then it perpetuates, right, this generational wealth that again excludes people of color. And so what we are trying to do now is trying to change those systems and even create new systems that enable more people of color to get into the investing space, right? So we are actively looking to change legislation, actively looking to change policy, trying to design investment models that get more people involved in the game, creating educational programs where people can understand that you don't have to be super wealthy, you don't have to have a yacht, and you don't have to be a member of a country club to be an investor. Right. And I think one of the mentalities that's very scary for Latinos specifically is that we don't ask, right? We are taught not to ask for things, right? How many times would you go to your neighbor's house and you wanted a extra food or a glass of water or a glass of soda, and your parents would say, don't ask, what you have is good enough, right? And so we're taught that scarcity mentality, and we're taught not to ask for things. And so when it comes time to asking for money, fundraising, support, we tend to not ask. And a good investor mentor of mine said, Eli, whatever funding you're looking for, always add an extra zero behind it, right? And that mentality is different, right? Because he says your white counterparts are doing exactly that. They're asking for 10x, 100x what you're asking for, and they're getting it. So we really have to have a paradigm shift around how we think about how we make our ask, and make our ask very big, because the opportunity is there, right? And even if they say no to that 100x ask, you might just end up with your 10x ask, right?
Eli also shared some fundamental advice as to how you can prepare yourself to eventually become an investor. It all starts with managing your money. Listen to his advice.
And this is the advice I would give to my, 22-year-old self. is really going back and understanding that if I have a decent job, right, and I'm making okay money, the idea is not to go out and buy toys. The idea is not to go out and buy all sorts of things that are going to make me feel emotionally better, right, and make me compete. But the idea is to really look at the different forms of using my money so that, one, I live within my means or below my means, right, so that I have a little bit extra to work with, and then understand where I can start making investments, right? And that can be something as simple as your 401k. That could be, getting into equity crowdfunding. That can get into how do I start doing some of the savings elements, right? You can start working in the stock market and understanding that your money that you put to work 10, 20 years ago or now will have impact 10, 20 years from now, right? If you just let it start working. And many times, we were not taught like how to really manage money. We were not talk about investments. We did not learn that if you put your money to work, it starts to exponentially grow and then it starts to work for you, right? We weren't taught those things. And so a big part of, your early career is really getting more knowledge around managing money. And ultimately that's what I tell people is, they're like, oh, investing is like Shark Tank. I said, it's not. Investing is not like Shark Tank. Investing is about managing money. And if you get good at managing money, then you can become good at investing, right? And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is understanding what all that means.
After we talked to Eli Velasquez, we furthered this conversation with Juliana Garaizar on episode 29. Juliana is originally from Spain and the head of Houston incubator Greentown Labs. Juliana is an experienced investor whose career has evolved into supporting inventors belonging to minority groups, especially women. Juliana has spent her career in a male-dominated field and has not only seen but experienced the different types of discrimination that many women face in many different fields. One of the things I found most illuminating about our conversation is her opinion on some of the factors that make it more difficult for Latinx inventors to successfully fund their startups. Listen to what she had to say.
I think there's two things. In general, Latinx Hispanics, they have trouble managing their finances because they lack the financial literacy. Mm-hmm. So with our funds, Rising America 1 and 2 for Portfolio, we're trying to invest a lot in companies that are trying to bridge that financial literacy gap, like Suma, for example. And, that's one of the things. The other one is the lack of self-confidence. And I think sometimes, it is cultural because in general, we have always been asked or, taught to respect the elders or people who being humble is a characteristic that is very valued. Not to speak over someone else who is maybe in a higher position. So I think, that kind of hinders us a little bit. But the other part, I think, is also, this micro bias and microaggressions that the voting community also suffers. And I want to put it out there because a lot of people think about this and they call it the imposter syndrome. But the imposter syndrome, when you talk about it for women and minorities, it always looks like, it's our problem. We have this syndrome. It's a disease and we don't know how it happened. It's there. How do we overcome it? But I think in many cases, we have this imposter syndrome because we have been very subtly excluded for many tables, So when people don't invite you for after hours events or they do their own thing, or they suddenly make after hours thing that is, I don't know, like whiskey and cigars or things like that. That is not the typical thing that maybe minorities would be into. That's when by not being included, you miss opportunities.
Juliana also mentioned one thing that is very important for Latinx entrepreneurs to be successful, and it is something she calls inspirational capital. Let's hear what she means by that.
And at the end of the day, investing happens a lot through networking and having the networking capital. That's one, but also the inspirational capital. And I think we haven't seen many Latinx leaders, showcasing themselves as Latinx leaders and saying like, you can do it. It is possible. I have achieved it. I have this tech company. I am a tech guru. You always think about Latinx being entrepreneurial, but always in the small business side. When you put your little restaurant or you put your franchise, and it's always like very hardworking, but not the kind of company that is hugely successful, the unicorn, the very scalable businesses. And I think it's about time all of these people who have made it very successfully also are proud of showcasing their Latinx identity so that they can inspire all the younger generation to make it happen, so like if they've done it, I can too. And I think that inspirational capital sometimes is even more important than the networking capital.
And speaking of inspirational capital, we were approached by one of those unicorns that are Latinx entrepreneurs. His name is Angel Munoz, and he is the founder and CEO of Mass Luminosity. Angel was born in New York to Puerto Rican parents, and after living in Puerto Rico, he moved back to the continental United States to pursue his college education. Angel didn't finish his college career, and although that didn't prevent him from becoming a successful entrepreneur, he is candid about how difficult his path was without having a college degree. Here's more.
Well, it's definitely not the easy path. I would start by saying that it is a lot more complex. But I'll try to transport myself back to that time where I was in Miami studying at Miami-Dade Community College. And I thought that, college, I had a different idea of college. And I think that that's what really started conflicting. The reality of college and what I thought about college were two different things. I thought that college was more like, a bit of a salad bar where I can study anything I wanted and learn a lot about it. So, if I wanted tomatoes today, I would pick that. So I took a variety of courses. I took calligraphy and cooking, but I had an emphasis in computer science, and I also loved psychology and communication. So I was taking all these classes, but I was not progressing because I wasn't taking the narrow classes that I was supposed to take. So that became a little frustrating for me because there was such an abundance of knowledge and it was right there available, but the college curriculum was demanding that I stay within a specific spectrum. So when I started narrowing down to that spectrum, I found that the realities of life came knocking on my door because my parents were not paying for my college. I was, and I had to work to go to college. And I was so anxious and believed honestly that I could achieve my goals without completing that at the time. I have to be completely honest that I thought that. And then I was thrown into life and dropped out college and realized that it was a lot harder and that people advanced faster, when I was at a job because they had college degrees. And I realized early that I may have made a dramatic mistake. And so it took 3 times the effort and really a lot of serendipity for me to land in investment banking, which is the job that really kind of ignited my potential as a person.
He also had some advice for those of you or the people in your life who may be looking to develop a career in tech. This is relevant because the importance of the virtual world became much clearer as a result of the global pandemic. Here's Angel's advice.
I would say that they need to be quick and they need to be accurate because technology grows exponentially. And it changes constantly. And so you have to strike fast and you have to be accurate in that strike. As far as what you need personally to be able to do that is you need to know the industry really well that you're going to approach. We like in our society to celebrate these companies that like Twitter and, all these things and TikTok now and all that have become very, very large very quickly. Those are the exceptions to the rule. Most companies linger in a substandard level to that, and they still are successful. So I would say pursue your dream. Of course, that's a basic. Pursue your dream, but analyze the industry. And if you think you have something that is better and you can develop it, strike fast.
Lastly, Angel also had something to say to you, our listeners, about the process we follow to bring these stories to you. Listen up.
For your audience to know, I had to go through a vetting process to be on the show. So this is not like you hop on the show, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxScan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.